Bobiverse Book 1. We are Legion, we are Bob. Part 2. Bob arrives in the system. He scans for resources and finds enough to get started building. Bob expects the Brazilian probe is able to move faster than specs suggested and will therefore be there early. Bob quickly begins to build weapons, including drones with a massive metal ball in its front that Bob calls a buster. The Brazilian ship arrives early, and Bob learns that the replicant is called Medeiros and he is not willing to cooperate with Bob and fires a missile. Using the busters, Bob manages to take out the missiles carried by the Brazilian probe and the probe itself. Once the Brazilian probe is dealt with, Bob explores his new solar system but unfortunately finds no life. With this, he is left with one option, that is to create more Bobs. He is hesitant but, in the end, decides to go ahead with it. Bob wakes up and realizes that he is not Bob 1. Bob 2 takes the name Riker. 4 more Bobs are created, and each takes a new name, though all are Bob. Bob 3 is Bill. Bob 4 is Milo and Bob 5 is Mario. All the Bobs quickly realize that they are not exact copies of each other, and each has a distinct personality. Bob 1 decides to head to Delta Eridni to look for life. Milo and Mario headed off into uncharted space. Riker and Bill decide to build themselves new clones, and Riker intends to go to Earth while Bill decides to stay in Epsilon Eridni. Milo decides to head for Omicron Squared Eridni. Mario heads for Beta Hydri because he wanted to get further away from Earth and everyone else. Milo arrives in Omicron Eridni and discovers life on 2 planets, and he decides to name them Vulcan and Romulus. Riker and his new clone Homer head to Sol System, which is Earth's home system. They find some humans left after a devastating nuclear war, but unfortunately, they also find more Medeiros clones that are now hurling asteroids at the Earth in an attempt to destroy all that is left of humanity. A battle ensues where Riker and Homer destroy 4 of the Brazilian probes, but there are still 2 left. The 2 Bobs hope to trick the Brazilians into believing they died in the battle. They eventually pull a surprise attack, but unfortunately Homer is struck. Riker finishes the battle and wins. Fortunately, Homer's matrix is still intact, and he is able to be repaired. Nearly all human life has been eradicated on Earth. Bill and his clone Garfield build a skunk works in Epsilon Eridni and finally achieve instant communication across interstellar distances. However, it will take many years for the plans to reach other Bobs across the stars so that they can use the technology. Riker and Homer establish communication with humans on Earth, specifically a general named Butterworth. There are less than 20 million humans left, and Riker must begin constructing colony ships that will hopefully be able to move humans to a new world. Bob 1 makes it to Delta Eridni and finds life on one of the planets. After creating an exploration drone, Bob visits the planets and finds seemingly intelligent creatures that look like a mash-up between a pig and a bat. 2 more Bobs head to Alpha Centauri and find Brazilian probes and destroy them, but realize that at least 1 Brazilian probe left the system before they got there. Bob 1 continues to observe the intelligent creatures and decides to call them Deltans. Bob identifies one very young Deltan as being more intelligent than others and decides to call this one Archimedes. Bob decides that he needs more help and so creates even more Bobs. They decide to name the planet Eden. Back in Sol, Riker and his new clones determine that it's going to take 1,500 ships or 1,500 trips to get the remaining Earthlings off the planet, and in the meantime many of the humans are in dire need and will not survive for long on the planet. Unfortunately, they can only get 3 ships built for now, and negotiations begin to break down since every group wants to get off Earth as soon as possible and cannot agree on who should go first. The Faith Enclave representative named Cranston tries to pressure Riker but is unsuccessful. The Spitsbergen Enclave is in desperate straits and will not survive long. They use the Svalbard seed vaults as a bargaining chip to get preferential treatment. On Delta Eridni, the Deltans are being attacked by gorilloids, creatures that are similar to the Deltans but bigger and less intelligent. It seems that the Deltans are slowly being eradicated. Bob decides to help the Deltans, and one of the ways he does this is by providing flint to the Deltan Archimedes, who seems to be capable of creating more complex tools. The Deltans use their better tools to help ward off more gorilloid attacks, and their hunting improves. In Seoul, Riker is still having trouble with the Spitsbergen group, and Cranston tries to use backdoor programming to control Bob. However, it doesn't work because Bob had already overridden those programs. On the planet Eden, the gorilloids attack again in greater numbers. This time Bob must step in with a buster at the last second in order to save Archimedes. Riker is still dealing with contention between the enclaves. Cranston introduces Riker to a woman named Julia, who is the great-great-great-granddaughter of his sister, and leaves them to talk. A Bob clone named Linus enters a new system and finds an Australian probe, but unfortunately the man has gone insane due to extreme isolation. Linus ends up having to destroy the other ship's core in order to peacefully shut down the Australian probe. Linus removes the Australian's matrix and then builds a custom VR for the man to help him recover from so many years alone. Riker and Homer receive a message from Bill for instance interstellar communication. They quickly begin building the prototype. As soon as they turn it on, Bill pops into their VR. This surprises them since they had only been expecting audio communication at best. After speaking with Bill, Riker tells the Enclaves that they have a destination in Romulus and Vulcan. However, most people think that they should have an entire planet to themselves, despite how unreasonable that is. The conditions on Earth continue to deteriorate, and the Bobs are at a loss for how to help the Enclave survive long enough to get off the planet, since there are not nearly enough colony ships. Bob 1 decides to contact Archimedes in order to help the Deltans escape the gorilloid attacks. Bob hopes to get them to get back to their old campsite where they can find Flint. The camp is a much more defensible area as well, however Bob doesn't know why they originally left in the first place. Milo enters a new system only to find the Brazilian again. Unfortunately, he is alone and is outmaneuvered by the Brazilian. In the end, Milo is destroyed without being able to send a backup of his mind. Another Bob dies to a nuclear explosion in the Sol system because of a terrorist group known as Vehement. The Deltans begin their trek back to the old camp, and along the way they begin to gather even more groups of Deltans. Back in Sol, Homer comes up with the idea of creating space stations for farming known as donuts. The donuts will alleviate the starving populations of humans. However, the humans are pissed that resources are being used for anything other than building colony ships, despite this possibly saving them from starvation. Cranston comes forward with a reasonable proposal to give up some of their surplus resources in order to secure a spot on the third ship, and Riker agrees despite his misgivings about the Faith Enclave. On the trip back to the Deltans' original camp, trouble strikes as many gorilloids attached, and Bob must step in again with busters. There are so many gorilloids that Bob nearly runs out of busters before repelling the gorilloids. When Bill learns that Milo has been destroyed, he decides that it is time to put an end to the Brazilian threat and begins building more Bobs. Colony ships are finally finished, and the first batch of humans can be shipped off to a new home world. The Deltans have arrived at their camp, however there are more gorilloids than ever. Meanwhile, Mario has finally arrived in the far reaches of space to find a solar system without any metals, despite the sun indicating that there should be plenty. He investigates a planet and finds a crashed alien craft and a completely dead ecosystem. The humans are finally loaded onto the colony ships and are sent to Romulus and Vulcan. 8 new Bobs arrive outside of the 82 Eridni system to confront the Medeiros clones. The Brazilian uses nuclear weapons and cloaking technology to take out one Bob clone. A cat and mouse game begins as the two sets of clones use every trick they can to take each other out. After a time only 2 Bobs were left, but they defeated Medeiros. The automated system takes out one more Bob, only leaving one damaged Bob behind. The Bob known as Khan survived and vows to finish off Medeiros. Human colonists finally arrive around the planet Vulcan. Much work still needs to be done, but humans are no longer a single planet species.